only know the basics, and the basics are that I like it.
Jonesy and Ray, just wondering.
Welcome back to Just Wondering podcast, where we will surprise each other with whatever topics come to mind. We literally know nothing and have made a rule to never research before recording. So buckle up.
We're your hosts. I'm Jones.
And I'm Ray.
And Ray, I was just wondering about coffee.
Well, I hope I'm an expert.
What is coffee?
Brown bean water.
It's a very interesting description, but it makes
Tell me I'm wrong.
sense. No, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
I just wasn't expecting you to say that, actually. How does it grow?
It grows on these trees. And there's usually, I think, like 1 or 2 crops in a year. Typically, what we drink is Arabica beans. And then there's another kind of coffee species called Robusta, but we don't usually drink that one. It's much stronger in taste and caffeine.
It's more bitter.
Yeah. So it grows, and they're like these red cherries. And when they're
Oh.
red, yeah, they're very ripe. And so you pick them then. And then once they're picked, then you want to like dry them and wash them. Usually there's also natural processed coffee that is unwashed, but typically you wash them and dry them, and then you leave them for like 6 weeks or something like that.
Oh,
And then you pack them up and send them off to a roastery to be roasted.
interesting. So it's the red berries turn into the coffee bean?
Yeah, the coffee beans inside.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, I don't understand.
Yeah, you take off all the pulp, and there's like a layer called the mucilage. And so if you leave
I like that
on,
word.
I know, but it's because it's kind of sticky and like gooey.
Yeah.
And so it is a mucilage. And in some processes, you do actually leave all of that on during the drying process.
Mhm.
And it changes the taste of the coffee. Most coffees that we typically drink are washed coffees,
Okay.
and then you leave them to dry. But if you leave them to dry with the full cherry still on, I think it makes it like kind of sweeter.
I think that makes sense.
And then if they're like half washed, it's called honey process. So it'll be like partially washed and partially unwashed. You leave a part of the mucilage on, and the more mucilage you leave on, the sweeter the coffee naturally is. And that's why it's called like a honey process, because it has that kind of sticky stuff on it that makes it naturally sweet, but there's nothing added to it.
I would have never known that, ever. Did you learn that when you went on your coffee trip?
I learned a bit about natural processing and a little bit about washed processing from the origin trip. I went to Honduras to multiple coffee farms.
When did you start drinking coffee?
I think I must have been around 16 or 17.
Yeah, me too.
And I would put about like half a cup of sugar. Yeah, half a cup of sugar, half a cup of milk, and like a little bit of coffee.
Just a splash of coffee.
And then I like ran out of brown sugar one day, so I drank it with no sugar, and I was like, oh, it still tastes good. And then one day I didn't have fresh milk, so I drank it without milk, and I was like, oh, it still tastes good.
I think that's how it goes. I also started like that, but not half a cup. I would do 2 milks, 2 sugars, and then I went down to like 2 milks, 1 sugar. And now my go-to order is 2 milks, but I will drink also black coffee if that's the only option.
As long as it doesn't taste like blueberries.
No, I don't like blueberry coffee. I'll admit it here, people. I'm sorry about that. It's not good. When you tricked me and gave me that blueberry coffee the first time I ever had it, I was not well. I didn't like that.
So like some weird things about coffee. The reason that coffee produces caffeine is because it's like an adverse effect in nature, right? It's very acidic. If animals will eat those cherries, it often makes them ill.
Okay.
And so it's a defense mechanism. And oftentimes you want to drink coffee. Well, coffee grows better at higher altitudes, and often it will be considered a better quality coffee just based on the altitude, because there's less competition of plant life.
That makes sense because less things grow up there.
And so the crop is able to get more from the soil. Hawaiian Kona coffee is very popular and it's very expensive, but it grows strictly in a valley that has volcanic soil. People always ask why it's so expensive, but it's essentially because you're paying American farmers versus South American farmers. We should pay more for coffee overall and support those South American or like African or like Indonesian farmers. They're doing a good job. They probably don't have the same resources and their coffee's good.
Delicious.
Do you know where coffee originates from?
No.
Yemen.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't actually know where that is.
It's in the Middle East, I hope. And there's been a lot of civil war and civil unrest,
Mhm.
and oftentimes the harbors and stuff are blocked off. So it's actually quite difficult to get coffee specifically from Yemen, but they produce really, really excellent coffee. And if you can get a direct trade where you actually are getting it from the farmer for a fair price, like it's really worth it to try and do stuff like that. So the actual plants themselves originated in Yemen. But you know how
Cool.
we brew coffee in a way that we drink it to reap the benefits of caffeine? Do you know where the kind of modern way of brewing coffee was discovered or founded?
I'm not sure how I would know that information.
It's from Ethiopia.
Very interesting. A worldwide thing.
I think it's one of the most consumed beverages worldwide, so it would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. People drink coffee everywhere.
Do you know much about decaf coffee?
No, I don't.
Would you really ever consider drinking decaf coffee?
Yeah, I don't really feel like coffee wakes me up. Like I don't feel the caffeine as much, I don't think. Like if I had a coffee in the morning versus didn't have a coffee in the morning, I don't actually feel that different, but it's more habit.
So typically people in the morning, they're like, I could really go for a cup of coffee
Mhm.
because they want that initial spark to wake them up. And caffeine actually takes 20 minutes to hit your bloodstream and take effect in your system. So when you have that first sip of coffee where you're just like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I needed, and you immediately feel more alert and awake, partly it is psychological, but it's also partly that the hot beverage has just warmed your entire system up, which biologically makes you more alert. So you could just have decaf coffee, or you could have hot water or broth.
I'm not gonna
Or-
drink just hot water, actually.
No, me
So
either.
that doesn't sound delicious. I'd rather just drink like regular water. I would drink decaf coffee. There's usually not as many different options. It's usually just like, obviously, because it has to be roasted a certain way to get the caffeine out.
It's actually not in the roasting. It's
Oh.
another process that happens between the producers at the farm level before it goes to the roastery. And the most effective way to remove the caffeine is a process called Swiss water processing.
Okay.
And I don't actually remember exactly how it works, but it's an organic process that strips 99% of the caffeine out of the coffee without taking away any of the quality or the flavor of the coffee bean.
I don't have any issues going to sleep or anything, so I never like really worry about my caffeine intake.
I try not to drink coffee after 3 p.m. more just because I need a cutoff time, because otherwise I would just keep drinking it all day because I love it.
How many coffees do you think you drink in a day?
5, 6.
5 or 6 coffees, or like 5 or 6 fluid cups?
Both. I use the cup-sized cup, to be
Oh.
honest. Yeah. Well, I think so. I have like an 8-ounce mug,
Yeah, I think that's maybe just over a cup.
but I don't fill it to the brim either because that's dangerous.
I imagine I did that. I just spill it everywhere.
How much coffee do you drink in a day?
On average, I would say I drink 6 cups also. I was drinking like 12 cups a day when I was working full-time and part-time and doing school full-time. Like that was a lot. So I had to stay awake.
Yeah.
It's not even like the caffeine keeps me awake, but just the habit of like continually drinking.
I don't think it's bad to drink 5 cups of coffee a day. I
Mhm.
realize that sounds like quite a lot, but ultimately, like, coffee is good for you. Like, adding a bunch of sugar is not good for you, as in pretty much anything. If you actually put a bunch of milk and sugar into your coffee, it does negate a lot of the positive effects of coffee and caffeine. Black coffee is good for your heart. It's good for your mind. It makes your body more alert and ready to do things as well. So it's good to have like coffee before sports. Some sports, like in tournaments and stuff, they ban drinking coffee before you compete. And if you drink coffee before like taking a test, it can help with your memory and your recall. But there's also health benefits in terms of like biologically for your heart health and for, I think, your digestive system as well. Decaf coffee can still have a lot of the same health benefits. And I think they recommend like 3 to 5 cups would be like the ideal.
Cool. Maybe I'll start drinking one of my coffees black a day. So I do
Mhm.
like black coffee, but I prefer coffee with milk. But I think that if I just keep drinking black coffee, then my preference will likely change. Do you like iced coffee?
I will drink an iced coffee if it is brewed to be cold. So like a cold brew coffee, it brews in cold water for 20 hours. It's very smooth, not acidic, and it's meant to be cold when you drink
Mhm.
it. I prefer a hot cup of coffee. I absolutely will not drink cold coffee if it was brewed hot to be had hot and it just gets cold. I do not like that.
Oh, no. I don't like that. It's so interesting. I like iced coffee. I drink iced coffee all the time, but not like just the way most people get iced coffee because I hate cream and I don't like sugar. But if I'm drinking a cup of coffee and it gets cold, I don't like it at all.
Yeah, that's why I just use a small cup for my coffee. Because if I pour a big cup, like it's cold by the time I get to the bottom.
I was gonna say, hey, when I go places and get iced coffee and the ice melts too fast, and then you just have like room temperature coffee, and like it's the same thing.
I was gonna ask you, what's your favorite way of brewing coffee, or like what would your preferred brew method be?
My most preferred,
Mm-hmm.
probably like a French press with a little bit of milk. That would be my like ideal coffee.
I like either French press or like pour over or like brewed cup. I'm not a big espresso drinker. I do like it in Americanos and lattes and stuff. They're fine, but they're really more decadent and more of a treat.
Can't drink lattes all the time. It's just far too much.
What has more caffeine, light roast or a dark roast?
A light roast.
Why?
Because it's roasted for less time. So you roast out less of the caffeine.
Okay, that's a pretty good start. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is the case, especially if you're brewing by volume. When you roast coffee, it expands and a lot of the moisture leaves. So dark roast beans are actually larger in size than light roast.
Oh.
So if you scoop it by volume, you actually have less coffee in a dark roast because the beans take up more space.
Okay, interesting. I was like, I don't really know where you're going with this, but you brought me all the way back around and pinned me where I needed to be.
If you prefer dark roast, but you want the caffeine, the best way to get the same amount of caffeine would be to weigh out your coffee before brewing it. Instead of doing it by volume, by scoop size, you would instead use like a food scale and measure the amount of coffee per cup of water. And it would be pretty comparable.
Wow. I'm not a huge fan of dark roast. I like it like a good medium roast to a light roast. I like to stay in that range.
I prefer a medium roast too, but one with more body. I find light roasts often don't have enough body for me.
So my goal for this year, not my goal, but my, what would you call it? My project, my hobby for the year, I don't know, is I'm trying a bunch of different local coffee shops, not necessarily local to me, local to someone, but like small business or smaller business coffee shops. And so I'm buying more coffee. So just trying a bunch of different places. So obviously like tried Coffee Tree. I got Deneen Coffee. Also shout out to you. Ordered from Pilot, a new coffee place called Poured. And I have a bunch more other suggestions of places that people told me to go sort of all over Toronto and even in Durham. Looking forward to doing that. But I typically buy their light or medium roast. And I find that getting it from smaller places, they tend to have more flavor versus like a big chain.
I agree. And I find overall lighter roast coffees have more flavor. I find the darker you roast the beans, the less of the coffee you actually taste. So for example, if you take like a bean and you roast it medium, you'll often get notes of like apricot or like wininess or there's quite a few different flavor profiles that you can pick out with a lighter roast. Whereas when you go darker, you lose a lot of the nuances.
I'm so bad with that kind of thing. Like when I read on the coffee that it says things like that and I taste it, I'm like, I don't taste any apricots.
Honestly, I can really relate to that because I feel like oftentimes too, coffee culture is quite snobby. I feel like there's more of a fear of being wrong. So I can taste a cup of coffee and be like, I don't really know, but I'm getting like blueberry potpourri. You can't describe that to a customer and be like, yeah, it tastes like old lady sitting room. Right? Like they don't want that.
Yeah.
Whereas like in the craft beer world, I can take a sip of beer. I can be like, it tastes like grapefruits and mangoes. It like has great hops or it's kind of malty. Like I can really like pick out the flavor profile very easily in craft beer in a way that is not that intuitive with coffee. And I think there's so much lingo and stuff that it makes it unapproachable.
I have like noticed that looking at some places. I was looking at one coffee place website and it wasn't saying like what type of roast any of the beans were. It was just giving these like flavor profiles that were in it, but it would be like French raspberries. I was like, what? So I didn't buy anything.
Dark roasts are kind of out of style at the moment. So I would say it's probably a safe bet that if it doesn't have the roast level, it would be a medium roast.
Yeah. All the flavors were just, they seem too extra. And because sometimes it's a really strong flavor because it's flavored coffee versus like a undertone. Got confused, too much information.
But that's why that blueberry coffee that I gave you was so remarkable, is because normally if we have a cup of coffee, we taste it and we're like, okay, well, it tastes mostly like coffee, but maybe this one's a bit fruitier or maybe it's a bit earthier, or, you know, like you can pick out like a vague description of it, not you take a sip and you're like, this tastes literally like blueberry pie. It was actually just the way that the bean was grown and processed and roasted pulled out that flavor profile. Like that's
wild.
crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy. If you guys have any other like specific questions that you can think of that you want me to answer or that I may know, feel free to fire them at me.
Yeah, hit her up because I don't have any answers.
Or if you want to surprise me, pile them all onto Nicole, send her all the questions, and she can rapid fire me on another episode.
People think I know a lot about coffee because I'm always carrying multiple coffees, but it's not true. I only know the basics, and the basics are that I like it. Great. What are you drinking?
Today I'm drinking Pompous Ass because I am a coffee snob. On brand for me today. What are you drinking?
Today I'm drinking Miller Lite in a bottle.
Oh, wow.
Very surprising. It's because my mom
Hell
had bought my mom bought them for me.
That's so nice. Thanks, Jojo.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, so let us know if you want to know anything about coffee. You can email us at justwonderingpodcast.ray@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at just.wondering.podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Thanks for listening. Oh God, like I know too much.